Final update. Caught FaceTiming my husband's coworker. I saw the love in his eyes turn to betrayal. Now he's talking divorce, and I'm left questioning. Have I destroyed my family, or was this marriage doomed from the start? The news had gotten out at Greg's job, and Brad D had completely ghosted me. No more texts, no more FaceTime calls. I tried messaging him once just to explain, but he never replied. I was officially alone. Greg got up and left the room, leaving me sitting there in my ridiculous lingerie, feeling like a fool. That night, I cried myself to sleep, knowing I couldn't reach him anymore. He was done with me, and there was nothing I could do to change his mind. Over the next few weeks, things got harder. My son started to notice the tension in the house, and I didn't know how to explain it to him. How do you tell your child that you ruined the only stable family he'd ever had? Greg was still there, but he wasn't present. He barely acknowledged me and only spoke to my son when necessary. It was like I'd become invisible in my own home. I didn't know who to turn to. My mom wasn't around, and Greg had been my whole world for so long that I didn't have many friends. So I called my dad. We weren't close, he'd never been the warm and fuzzy type, but I was desperate. Dad, I said, my voice trembling as I sat in my car outside the house. I need your advice. Greg wants a divorce, and I don't know what to do. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mandy, he said finally, his voice gruff. What do you expect me to say? You messed up. You know that, right? Tears welled up in my eyes. I know, but I don't know how to fix it. He hates me. Well, can you blame him? He said bluntly. You've got a good man there, Mandy. Or had, I guess. From what you've told me, he's done everything for you, and you spit in his face. I don't know what to tell you. You dug this hole, and now you've got to live with it. I sat there in silence, his words hitting me like a ton of bricks. I'd hoped for some kind of comfort, maybe a pep talk, or even just a shoulder to cry on, but my dad wasn't that guy. He wasn't going to sugarcoat it for me. Look, he said after a moment, you're still young enough to figure things out, but if you keep blaming everyone else for your problems, you're going to end up alone, and that's all I've got to say. The call ended, leaving me feeling more lost than ever. I thought about what my life would look like without Greg, and it terrified me. At 32, with a son to take care of, I didn't know how I'd start over. Greg had saved me once, given me a home, a family, a future, and now I'd ruined it all. The truth was, I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I wasn't proud of the woman I'd become. I'd let myself go, taken Greg for granted, and made impulsive choices that destroyed everything good in my life. And now I was paying the price. Every time I saw Greg, his coldness reminded me of what I'd lost. Every time I walked past a mirror, I hated the woman staring back at me. My son deserved better, Greg deserved better. But now there was no way to undo the damage I'd done. All I could do was wait for the inevitable, the day Greg would pack his bags and leave for good. The final blow came a few weeks later. Though I'd been bracing for it ever since Greg said the word, divorce. I kept holding on to a sliver of hope that he might change his mind. That maybe he'd see I was trying to be better, even if it was too little too late. But Greg wasn't the kind of man to forgive something like this, and deep down I knew it. One Friday evening, Greg came home with a stack of papers in his hand. My stomach churned the moment I saw them. He sat down at the kitchen table, his expression unreadable, and gestured for me to sit across from him. I hesitated but did as he asked, feeling like a condemned woman sitting before a judge. I've already filed, he said, sliding the papers toward me. All I need is your signature. The room felt like it was spinning. I picked up the papers, my hands trembling, and skimmed the legal jargon. It was real, this was happening. Greg, I said, my voice breaking. Do we really have to do this? Can't we just? No, he said firmly, cutting me off. We can't, I've made up my mind, Mandy. There's no fixing this. I dropped the papers on the table, tears streaming down my face. Please, Greg, I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy, he shook his head. You should have done all of that years ago. I gave you chance after chance, and you wasted them all. I'm done, Mandy. I've been done. I'm only still here because of your son. I wanted to make this transition easier for him, but I can't keep living like this. His words felt like knives slicing through me, but I couldn't even argue. He was right. I'd taken him for granted, used his love and loyalty like a safety net, and now I was paying the price. What about my son? I asked, my voice trembling. He loves you. You're the only father he's ever had. Greg sighed, leaning back in his chair. I'll still be there for him if he wants me to be. This isn't his fault, and I'm not going to abandon him. But I can't stay in this house anymore. I can't stay with you, I nodded slowly, my chest aching. Where will you go? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. I've already found a place, he said. I'll move out next week. I've arranged for a mediator to help us figure out the rest, the house, the finances, all of it. The finality in his voice broke something inside me. This wasn't just a fight or a rough patch, this was the end. I wiped my tears and looked at him, searching for any trace of the man who had once loved me. But all I saw was a stranger I had created with my own selfishness and neglect. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice barely audible, for everything. Greg's expression softened for a moment, but only for a moment. I know you are, he said, but sometimes sorry isn't enough. And with that, he got up and walked away, leaving me alone at the table with the divorce papers. I sat there for what felt like hours, still staring at them, the weight of my choices pressing down on me like a crushing wave. The week leading up to his move-out day was agonizing. Greg avoided me as much as possible, and I avoided him too, ashamed to face the man I'd betrayed. My son didn't understand what was happening yet, but I knew the day would come when I'd have to explain it to him. The thought made me sick. When the day finally came, Greg packed his things without a word. He hugged my son tightly, promised to see him soon, and then walked out the door without looking back. I watched from the window as he drove away, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt what it was like to be alone. Over the next few weeks, the reality of my situation sank in. Brad was gone, Greg was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces of the life I'd destroyed. I started looking for work, something I hadn't done in years, but it wasn't easy. Employers didn't seem interested in a woman with a patchy job history and no degree, and the rejections piled up quickly. I tried reaching out to friends, but most of them were Greg's friends too, and they weren't eager to take my side. Even my dad, who I'd hoped might step up, kept his distance. "You'll figure it out," he'd said when I called him, but his tone made it clear he didn't want to get involved. I spent my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let things get this bad. I wasn't proud of the person I'd become, the lazy, selfish woman Greg had every right to leave. I hated her, but I didn't know how to be anyone else. The house was quiet now, almost eerily so. Without Greg, it felt empty, like the life had been sucked out of it. My son kept asking when Greg would come back, and every time I had to tell him the truth, he wasn't coming back. The pain in his eyes was like a knife to my heart, and I hated myself more with each passing day. In the end, Greg didn't just leave me. He left a lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life. Trust is fragile, love is fragile, and when you take them for granted, they shatter, leaving nothing but regret in their place. I'd ruined the best thing I'd ever had, and there was no one to blame but myself.